But today I wanted to look at fatherhood as a picture. Today we're looking at a father that is very much overlooked in the scriptures. And it's really because of the prominence that Mary holds in that particular set of verses, in that particular story. We all are concentrating on Mary and who she is and what happened to her and what's going on in her life. And we forget to look at this person by the name of Joseph. He was the husband eventually. Joseph was the adoptive father of Jesus. And I think it's significant that we look at him and look at what he did and what he accepted as God called him to be the adoptive father of Jesus Christ. Now, anybody here ever heard of Anne Margaret? Huh? Well, back in 1983, the first really serious role Anne Margaret took was for a movie called Who Will Love My Children? Does anybody remember that? Anybody ever seen that movie? It's a tearjerker, isn't it? Yes. Anne Margaret takes this role, and it's a true story about a woman by the name of Lucille Fray. She was a young woman. She had 10 kids. Married to a man, they farmed, and they lived a pretty hard life. Well, all of a sudden, after she's had 10 kids, she finds out that she has cancer, and that within a year she will be dying. It's terminal. It's a very depressing story. But the emphasis of the story is that what she decided to do was to go out and to find families for each one of her kids. Find someone to take care of each one of her dearly cherished, loved children. Because she realized that her husband, who was a good man, who loved his kids, loved her and all, but it was impossible for him to continue farming and doing all that he was doing, as well as take care of 10 kids. You know, back then they didn't have all the social programs and things that we have today to help people. You know, back then, because of their family situation, all they were pretty much on their own. So this woman decides, man, I love my kids. I know I'm not going to be here for them. And she goes on this journey to find just the right person, the right couple, the right people to take care of each one of her children. It's again, a heart-wrenching story. But she goes and she tries to do something to provide the absolute finest, the absolute best that she can for her kids. I think in many ways the scripture story I read to you about the birth of Jesus, this film reminds me of that. They kind of go together to me. Just like that woman who wanted to personally choose the parents for each one of her kids, so God has done the same thing throughout all of eternity, throughout all of human history, as he chose Mary and Joseph. Don't forget the and Joseph part, to be the adoptive parents of Jesus. God looks all through history and he finds this beautiful young lady with a sweet heart, devoted to God, and he chooses her. But he also went looking for a father. He also went looking for someone who would provide that end of the spectrum for the raising of his only begotten son. You see, God clearly demonstrates in this scripture story the importance of parents, the importance of both sides of the coin. That everybody brings something to the table, and they're all extremely important. Having said that, let me just say that I know that in many situations today, there's not always a traditional mom and a pop. You know, those things are just part of reality. It's part of life. But what I will tell you is that the scriptures clearly, again, demonstrate for us that God never leaves us alone. He never does. He doesn't just, say, well, that's not traditional or something happened here, whatever, and leave us on our own. It does not happen. God is always there for the building up of his children, meaning both us and the kids that we watch, the ones that we love, the ones that we care for. God is there with us. Always. Always. Without exception. So Joseph gets chosen. And God had looked for someone who was just the right person, just the right character, just the right heart of a person to raise his only begotten son. One that would be willing to go to the cross and die for humanity. One that would be willing to accept that he is also the Godhead. He is also part of the triune God. He is also the one that is going to be crucified on the cross for the sake of people that would reject him. That's the kind of ironic part, is that Joseph, when you think about it, Joseph adopts the child that the rest of the world will reject. It's really kind of ironic. And it says volumes about who Joseph was, as well as Mary, of course. I want to look today at some of the characteristics or character traits of this guy by the name of Joseph. What do we know about Joseph? We know that he was a loving man. Matthew 1 tells us this. It says, Joseph, her fiancé, was a good man, and he did not want to disgrace her publicly. So he decided to break the engagement quietly. Think about it. Here's a good man. He finds his sweetheart. He wants to get married. He does everything in the traditional way that they did back in those days. You know, the wedding is set. The families are all in agreement. Everything is done. There's probably some stolen moments where he and Mary talked about, you know, the house and the white picket fence and the, you know, all the things that they're going to have when they get married, and the business that's going to take off, and, you know, all of the ways they're going to spend their lifetimes together. All of that's been done. And yet all of a sudden what happens? Whoa, Mary, you're pregnant? I wonder, did she tell him right away? Did she try and hide it? What took place? We don't really know. But what we do know is how Joseph reacted to it. Now, he was probably mad at first, or probably extremely surprised, probably very disappointed. I mean, after all, you know, the love of his life says, guess what? And there was only one person he could rule out, and he was like, I didn't do it. I mean, wouldn't you be upset, furious, disappointed? I mean, all of those emotions, I'm sure, ran through this man. Ran through this man. Now, back then, the penalty for this type of thing was what? Anybody remember? Stoning. Stone them in the streets. Ruthless. And Joseph, though, with his loving heart, decides that he wants to simply, we got to call it off, but we're going to put her away quietly. There were ways around the judicial system. I can't even talk. Judicial system. There were ways around all of that. And Joseph was going to pursue that. He wanted to divorce her quietly. See, even though they hadn't officially done the marriage routine yet, when they became betrothed to each other, it was the same as being married today, really. You had to divorce that person if something took place. Now, we know that Joseph loved her dearly by his writings. We know that he was a gentle man with her. But you know what? Joseph, I think, was also a very kind man. Why do I say that? I say that because of the way he reacted, or at least what we know about the way he reacted. Again, probably very disappointed, but he immediately sought her best interest. He immediately said, well, how can I do this? How can I divorce her without publicly disgracing her? Without putting her, to the test, or putting her in danger of losing her life? Or how can I do this and so she can have her life and I can have mine? I think Joseph was loving. I think he was kind. And these are all traits that God is using or will use for the bringing up of his Son. Think about the character of Jesus as we compare. Ephesians 5:25. I'm talking to all the guys here right now. Women, you can go back to sleep. 5:25, Ephesians. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. End of discussion. You see, he doesn't make any ifs, ands, or buts here. None whatsoever. Love her with everything that you are, everything that you have. Sacrificially love, regardless of the personal cost to yourself. Not that easy to do. I think that toward Jesus, Joseph was the same way. He loved this child with all that he had. Here's a child that wasn't conceived by him. I don't see any evidence of this attitude that this is not my own flesh and blood. I don't see any resentment. I don't see any indifference, writings or words anywhere in any of the things I've read about it. I don't see any lack of love whatsoever when it comes to this particular story in the Scriptures about the way Jesus was conceived and his birth. We know that Joseph adopted him basically as his own son. He protected him from Herod. He fed him. He clothed him. He cared for him. He cared for him when he was sick. He taught Jesus even his own trade of carpentry. Again, Joseph adopts completely this young child that the world would eventually reject. We also know that Joseph was a devout man. He followed the Lord's leading and guiding and direction throughout this whole process, throughout this whole series of events. He didn't follow the plan that he had made out for his own life. You know, when he and Mary got together and talked about the white picket fence and all that, he didn't follow all of that. No, he followed the plan that God laid out for him and opened his eyes to when the time was right. He obeyed. When God spoke and says, take Mary to Egypt for her own safety, he immediately obeyed, the Scriptures tell us. And when God said, okay, it's time to come back, he started heading back. You see, Joseph was a man of faith. He was a man of obedience. He was a man of love. He was a man of faith. He had tremendous character. It takes a lot of faith to pack your bags and go to another country with no prospects, no pre-planning, simply based on what God has told you to do. I mean, he could have made all kinds of excuses. He could have come up with all kinds of reasons not to do it. But he was a man of complete faith in God. This is the one that, again, through all of human history, God searches out as he's looking for parents for his child. He picks Mary and he picks this guy because of who he is. Now, back to the fathers again. Ladies, go to sleep. Guys, I'm going to tell you right now. Wendy, quit doing that, will you? I'm teasing you. Guys, your example speaks volumes not only to others around you, your spouses and your kids and your grandkids, but to the world. Your example means more than anything. It really does. When you think about it, we can say a lot of things. I am this and I am that and all. But people always watch to see if what you say is what's proven in your actions, in your thoughts, in your words, in the things that you do, and the priorities you set for your life. You are what you do is who you are. What you say is who you are. But it all has to go together. again, when we look at the reality of being a witness to other people, especially those in our families, nothing is more important than that we are the people we say we are, that our example is the legacy that is always left behind, that who we are, who we say we are, match. If you say, hey, I put God first, then you know what? It needs to be the example in all that you do, all that you say, everything that takes place in your life. Because I guarantee you, there are people watching. They might not be sitting there behind, the curtains or whatever, peeking out watching, but your kids know exactly what you're doing. Your grandkids know exactly what you're doing. People are very observant. Could not any one of us start a discussion about somebody else in the room today because, maybe there's somebody we don't know very well, but I could probably start talking about them because of observance. We watch. Sometimes it's not even conscious. But again, the example that we bring to the table makes all the difference in the world. And I think this is what God found in Joseph, was that he was a man of faith. He was a man that put his faith and his beliefs and his obedience and everything else into gear so that he would be the correct, proper, godly example that he needed for his son Jesus. We get confused sometimes when we think about Christ because the Bible tells us he was fully human, fully divine. Well, how's that work? Was he born and he said, well, I know I'm God. I'm just kind of faking it right now, until I get older. No, I don't think so at all. Fully human means that you learn, you grow the same way that any other kid grows. God needed godly parents for this young boy. So our examples really are the teachers. They make all of the difference in the world. I think Joseph was also a very wise man. Why did I say that? Well, the reason is because by all normal accounts, we see Joseph as a man who was kind of short-lived. After Jesus became an adult, we don't hear anything about him. He's gone. Now, does that mean he died? Probably. We don't know. We don't know what the scenario is. But we do know that Joseph took this young child who was not his and nurtured him and cared for him and taught him and was an example to him, like all the times they traveled to the temple and his worship and everything. God knew that this guy Joseph would be the example to him, to his son, that he wanted him to be. You see, that's the beauty of fatherhood, really of parenthood. Let's put it in perspective. Parenthood is an awesome thing, but a tremendous responsibility. Grandparenthood is an awesome thing. Again, a tremendous responsibility because people watch. And most of the time, those people are the ones you love the most. They really do. They really do. My dad's been gone for a lot of years, but I'll tell you what, I can remember certain things, and they stay with me, and they stay with me, and they stay with me. I used the example here in church once. He was a truck salesman, and he would order, $200,000-$300,000 worth of trucks without a deposit, without a contract, without anything, nothing. Just because the guy said so. Yeah, I'll take them. I remember my dad emphasizing how important integrity was. And you did what you said that you'd do. See, these are the lessons that we teach. We teach others. We teach our kids and grandkids and our children. We teach through example. Think about it in your own life, the people that mean the most to you, the examples that they left you with. I think that Joseph was a man that God wisely chose to raise his son so that when Jesus became an adult, he knew exactly who he was, and he had been raised by a godly family, godly mom, godly dad, and he would be prepared for the mission that was ahead of him. Now, somewhere in there, Jesus understands who he is, that he's God's son. I guess one day when we get to heaven, we can ask him how that worked. But we do know that this young boy whose nose was running half the time and would run and fall over like, toddlers do. We know that Joseph and Mary were the ones that God chose. Parenthood is an awesome responsibility, but tremendous responsibility. But it's good, isn't it? Yeah. What would it have been like? What would it have been like if Jesus didn't have the awesome example that he did have when he was brought up? Would we be standing here today? As I read that story, and I kind of think back about what it must have been like, all the decisions that had to be made, all of the choices that both Mary and Joseph had to make for many years. For many years. What an unbelievable privilege it was for them to go through that. I'm sure that they didn't always make the right decisions. I'm sure that just like me, they screwed it up here and there, and and God said, "Oh, that's all right, I can fix that." But again, this privilege of being a parent is one of those things that is, I think, one of the highest privileges we could ever have, outside of knowing God on a personal level, but also being his representative and entrusted with the care of others. Now, again, we don't always do it right, but he's got our back. And in that, we can rest.